Hi Mikhail, we're at the showroom for your current exhibition, Songs for the Storm to Come. Can you talk to us a little bit about that title and what it means?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to do the interview. The title of the exhibition, Songs for the Storm to Come, has, in a way, two dimensions. One of them is this kind of preemptiveness. It is warning us of something that's to come. And obviously, storm, the word storm, refers to something that is bigger than us, something that is dramatic or even cataclysmic. So it refers to that we need to be warned, and this work is a kind of collective warning. And the other meaning that it has is actually this double reading of the sentence. So, songs for the storm to come, which we can read it either as something that will actually come, which is the first meaning that I talked about, the preemptiveness, or we are singing in order for the storm to come, which refers to indigenous weather calling practices that usually would take the form of songs and performances with instruments like the rain stick, or instruments that usually would imitate sounds of different weather phenomena. In this particular work, in the performance that it captures, we are using such instruments to call a weather phenomenon to come to us. So it has this kind of double meaning.
Your previous films, I've noticed, have a strong sense of place, but in this film there's no backdrop apart from these maps that are climate modeling maps showing the vulnerability of London and the UK in case of flooding. I'm wondering what made you decide to go more minimal for this work?
The reason this project is filmed essentially in a black box is because a lot of the work is about this kind of speculative futures. It's about having this vacuum that we fill with our imagination. So as you mentioned, the starting point of the project, and something that features in the main film, is a selection of maps as they're given to us by climate modeling scientists that show London and the UK in the future. But I didn't want to have a setting where this is described or it becomes illustrative. So I wanted this kind of more abstract space that is filled both with the idea of a flooding to come, as well as with possible solutions that are proposed by the participants. In a way, the future, we don't know exactly what the future will be like, and it's up to us to fill that empty space of the black box with a picture that we want to create for ourselves in the future.
You worked with a choir from, it's called the She Cooperative Choir for Women and Non-Binary People. And your previous works had these connections as well to ecofeminism, which I think is such an interesting concept. And I'm wondering what is it about ecofeminism that attracts you? What can women bring to ecological concerns?
Women have a very specific relationship to resources, because usually women are the ones that take usually the role of carers. They bring up children, and they are very aware of food supply, water resources, and scarcity. So they have a very specific relationship to what is available around them in the ecosystem in order to bring up the next generation. So this is a very important role. And when we talk about kind of global south or women, indigenous women, again, you know, as the ones that are the primary carers and the ones that are responsible for nourishing, you know, children, older people, the next generation, they are the ones that also they tend to be more aware of what is a sustainable practice in terms of making sure that the next generation is nourished and inherits a livable planet. In fact, there is also a mother that in the film appears with her baby. That was very significant, and I really wanted to address that.
Was that something you asked her to do, or did it come about spontaneously? Did she bring her baby to the set?
Well, in the rehearsals that we had, and the workshops and rehearsals, there was one person, Laura, who had a baby that was 2 or 3 months old. So the baby had to be with her all the time. Sometimes the baby would be sleeping in the background and would be making noises, and the baby would be responding in some way. And then I asked her whether she would be happy for Alicia, her baby, to feature in the film. It's not something that I thought about at the very beginning, but then in subsequent kind of workshops and meetings, I thought it would actually enrich the project, because the baby is like a capsule of the future almost. It's like we see time, temporality, as something that is going to unfold in this body that is now like this, but in 25 years, so we're looking at maps from 2050, when this baby will be 25. So somehow that becomes very tangible when we see the baby. And we think, okay, in 2050, this baby will be 25, and this is the reality that she will be facing, what the scientists are predicting. So it makes it somehow, it's easier for the viewer to imagine, and for the work to be more direct in its communication of that message.
Another thing I noticed was your colors in this work are quite muted. There's how many women in total?
Oh dear, I think about 15.
Yeah, and they're wearing sort of shades of brown. It made me think of soil or earth, but I'm also thinking back of earlier films such as Ferocious Love, where the teenagers were dressed in glittery suits, or Children of the Unquiet, where the young children were dressed in very bright colors. So again, was that something you brought to the work intentionally, and what was the message behind this sort of muted color palette?
Yes, the color scheme of each project is very specific and in response to both the participants as well as the research. So you mentioned previous projects like Ferocious Love, which again engages with ideas around climate change and some kind of environmental calamity, and a group of young people are survivors. And with those people, we were thinking about, okay, what kind of clothes are we going to need in the future when the temperatures are going to be higher? So we were thinking about thermal blankets and the fact that they tend to be reflective, either gold or silver. With Children of Unquiet, which was set in Italy, and it references a very specific project. It's the first geothermal power plant in the world. This is where sustainable energy production this is where sustainable energy production was invented. And there were a lot of leaflets that were produced by the industry, to promote that project. And the color scheme that we used in the color palette of the project is referencing the brochures that that industry was using to promote themselves and the industry. So these very bold colors. In this one, Songs for the Storm to Come, we were talking a lot about the Earth, our connection to the planet, and the idea of using a more neutral, earthy palette came up quite early on. So this is one of the reasons why we were using it. Also, for a long time, I've been fascinated by the depiction of women in painting, women and sound in painting. So for example, if we think about 17th century Dutch painting, very often we'd see young women with virginals and harpsichords, musical instruments, and they would be playing usually indoors. They would be solitary or just with one listener. So I was thinking in a way that my film is making a kind of conversation across time with that, and depicts, you know, female bodies in making noise in a completely different way. You know, they are addressing the viewer, they're looking at us, and they're not polite in their sound making. They're actually loud and assertive. But there's also something else about the color palette, specifically of that type of painting, that all these other colors that, you know, blues or reds, they were very expensive colors. So if we look at Vermeer, for example, he was using neutral tones. So this word, this phrase, earth green, this was the specific green that was being used as a kind of base for the entire painting. This kind of natural tones that we see in those paintings comes from this earth green that was specific to those paintings. So don't expect the viewers to necessarily make that connection, but in my research, that was a reference.
Yeah. Do you often refer to painting in your work, or is it something you studied?
I studied architecture, which I think is quite obvious in a lot of my work, both in the way that I select specific locations, buildings or landscapes to film, but in the absence of landscapes and buildings, like in Songs for the Storm to Come, this kind of architectural training is visible in how I film. So for example, when you are looking at a drawing of a building, you have the facade, you have the plan, you have the cross-section. So very often the way I use the camera is like that. So in Songs for the Storm to Come, we have in most of the film, we have a kind of frontal view as if we're looking at a facade, but we also have a vertical view from above, which is like the plan that you would have of a building. So that training has informed all my artistic language. In terms of painting, I'm fascinated by painting, and I look at painting a lot, especially in terms of composition and framing, but it's not something I studied academically. Yeah. It's something that I studied, you know, on my own because I'm just passionate about it.
Yeah. You also use sound in all of your works, and sound becomes sculptural or even architectural, we could say. What I find interesting is that you don't just focus on voice, but you also focus on sounds made by the human body, like clapping or stamping, or sounds made by everyday objects. And in this film, I was wondering, we hear the women's voices, but what other sounds, how did you generate the other sounds?
In Songs for the Storm to Come, we went through a process of sound workshops, and always in relation to the theme of climate change. So, and speculative thinking. So for example, I would ask the participants, what do you think the sound of ice melting is? Or what do you think the sound of flooding might be? What is the soundscape of this this forthcoming future? So we would go through different kind of maybe weather phenomena or conditions, environmental conditions, or feelings that they would have. I mean, this is the incredible thing about sound, that it can be descriptive of something that you hear around you through mimicry, but also it can be very expressive of how you respond emotionally to it. So for example, there is a sequence in which we hear the sound of gasping, which was their response to the images of flooding. They said, okay, in this particular situation, it makes us feel panic, and also it makes us feel that we're going to be wanting to breathe and not being able to. So one of them came with this idea, how about if we gasp? When you hear gasping once, has a very specific emotional impact on the listener. But then when you multiply it and you amplify it, it's absolutely shocking. And this is, you know, the kind of effect that I wanted in the work. So we go throughout this video work, we go through different feelings, and each one, in a way, is expressed through a very reduced palette of sound, you know, or spectrum of sounds. It would be like one sound or two sound gestures that are repeated, amplified, stretched, or condensed.
Yeah. And breath comes back in this work a lot. I found the gasping, that was definitely noticeable, but there were also some more, there was also some more regular breathing going on, and they were quoting from a work about breath. I found this quote really beautiful. It says, "To survive, we must return to all living things, to conceive of breathing beyond its purely biological aspect." And I can imagine that breath is one of the most important things in your work, because you're working with people who use their voice. How do you view the breath as part of the sound that you use in your work?
So breathing is an interface between the inside and the outside, the interior world and the environment. It's what links us to the world around us. So if we really care about our personal well-being and our health, that means we need to care about the air that we breathe, which means, by extension, that we really need to care about the health of the environment around us. So breath is really fundamental. Something else that I think is important as a material, breath, is that it's non-verbal, yet it can communicate a lot of things. So imagine the gasp of a person who is drowning, or the startled inhalation of a person who is surprised, or the sigh of a person who is relieved. So these are all different kinds of breaths, different kinds of sonic qualities that breath can have. There is no language, but there's a lot of meaning and a lot of expression. And I think that, since the very beginning of my work, has been a primary kind of material that I've been exploring.
Language does come in that you often quote philosophers, and also in this case I heard some sort of louder call-outs, like the women say, "Stop the war, start transitioning now." And I'm wondering, do you feel there is, with the progressing of your work, there is that need for a call to action, or to become more pronounced in what you want humanity to change?
I do think that in my trajectory to date, I think there has been a kind of transition from works that at the beginning were a lot more abstract to now creating works like Songs for the Storm to Come, which I feel, in my opinion at least, is it has a balance between abstraction, which we see in lots of sequences. So we have images that are very abstract, just color flashing and light, or sounds and vocalizations that are very abstract, but also more direct messaging, and also quoting facts. So I feel that, in a way, our environmental awareness at the moment and where we are in terms of the climate crisis requires more direct messaging. Yeah. And I feel that at this age that I am right now, I wanted to create a work that is more precise, it's more direct in its messaging, but without making the work sloganistic. Yeah. There are sentences like "stop the wars" or "start the transition now," which are direct calls to action, but they're combined with abstraction, with other more open sequences. And I should add that all the content that is not quotations from the specific philosophers or readings of their books, they are sentences that have been generated by the participants. I just orchestrate a situation. I present specific facts, specific research, and then through workshops and conversations, the participants generate the content. So this work, Songs for the Storm to Come, and all my work is always a representation and a portrait of a specific group, collective, or community, their perspectives of a particular theme. So I don't make work which is about me, yes, or work that is, how can I say?
Scripted. It's
not scripted. My work is not scripted, and my work is always representations of others.
Yeah. Talking about these other communities, to go back to some of your earlier works, you worked with all kinds of people in different locations. You worked with miners in Wales, with elderly sea women in Korea, the young children you mentioned in Italy. What comes first when you think of a project? Do you think of a certain location? Do you think, I want to work with these people? Or do you always start with the theme?
It really depends on the commission and the situation. So projects like Sounds from Beneath, which was in collaboration with retired coal miners, it was the place that came first. And then questions around who used to inhabit this workplace that is now abandoned. And then my research leading me to a specific community and connecting with them. Then projects like Ain't Got No Fear, which was filmed in northeast Kent, which was a collaboration with a small group of young teenage boys. That was, again, a kind of general research or interest in youth culture and raves, but the group just emerged out of me being there, walking in the woods and getting lost, and then having a chance encounter. However, there are projects like Songs for the Storm to Come, which is the project we're showing now at the showroom, or projects like No Ordinary Protest, and I think they're quite connected, which was a commission by the Whitechapel in 2018, which was set in a school. So in both of these projects, the institutions that commissioned me to create the new work already had some relation with a specific organization, institution, a group, or in this particular case, an amateur choir. And then it's just a matter of conversation. So we talked about a lot of possible collaborators, and just, you know, after several meetings and with different people and presentations, in this particular case, you know, to She Choir, they responded positively, saying they would like to develop a project with me to collaborate. So
it depends.
It really depends.
Yeah, and it must be really powerful for the people you collaborate with as well to see themselves and hear themselves. Have you had some feedback that you will always remember from the participants?
For me, witnessing young people, specifically teenagers or children, seeing themselves bigger and seeing themselves in an exhibition space, watched by visitors, this experience is irreplaceable. I've been in situations that young people would say, "But why are visitors staying?" And I'm telling them it's because they're interested in what you're saying. And then it's this expression they have in their faces, this the kind of realization, oh my God, I matter. What I say, what I'm expressing, my life experience is important and is worthy of being listened to. It's that moment of realization that especially young people have, which is really very rewarding for me to witness. But because the projects are always going through a process of, you know, workshops, there are a lot of transferable skills that, or rather there are a lot of skills that are transferred. Yeah. There's a lot of learning that happens in the process of making a project. And participants always give feedback in terms of what they have learned, from recording technologies to singing, to presenting themselves in public.
Yeah, there's great generosity in your work, which is incredible. And actually, that brings me to my last question, but you also have a public program around this current show at the Showroom, and you're working with children. So can you tell us a little bit what you're doing with the children?
So we're working with teenagers. They're between the ages, I believe, of 17 or 16 and 19. And we are creating a participatory performance. It starts from my experience of being part of a climate protest that was led by young people. It was one of those Friday for Future.
Where was that?
It was in the City of London a few years ago. And then, again, I immersed this group of young people from different parts of London in the research. So we're looking at the maps. We have also witnessed the work, and they gave feedback. The reading of the work by young people is incredible. It's very accurate because they can analyze the images and the messaging in ways that I didn't expect. So we engaged with the project, the research, and then we went through some of the same processes. So for example, I used some of the methodologies by Pauline Oliveros, which then I present to the young group, and then we generate content in the same way that we did actually for the generation of this of the project. So we are transforming that into a performance, which is going to take place in a couple of days, and I'm looking forward to that.
Yes, great. Well, thank you so much,
Thank
Mikhail.
you.
It was
Thank you for the
really nice talking to you.
Thank you.